Hey everyone. So I do a lot of research on YouTube and all that, and I'm into older bikes. My newest bike, I guess, is like 1979. So working on these things, find out that there's, I use the manual a lot, but sometimes the manual just doesn't get it sometimes, right? So looking on YouTube and all that, and I go through all the forums and things like that, you still seems like there's some gaps missing in things like that there on things. And I thought, well, I'm taking and rebuilding this entire bike, so as I'm taking things apart, why not make a video of it? If nothing else, if you're doing this as well, and you're looking at something like this fork tube or this fork assembly here, and you don't know, how it comes apart, and you're kind of skittish about taking it apart and things like that. Well, I thought that doing this video, you could at least take and have a look and see how it all comes apart, and be a little bit more informed when you go to do your own thing, right? I don't claim to be an expert or nothing like that, so take that with a grain of salt. But essentially, this Hydra Glide fork assembly from a 64 panhead that I'm putting together, and it's time to rebuild the fork tubes. They were leaking, and really this bike had a lot of water in it. I have a lot of problems with everything in the bike having water in it, right? So the seals were leaking in it at the very least, and I wanted to take it apart and clean it because I figured that there was water in it, which there was. It's just full of water. So but I haven't seen anything on YouTube as far as how to take one of these apart, so I thought I would contribute a little bit and put it out there for anybody that wants to see how it comes apart, right? Like I said, I use the manuals a lot, and here's the manual, and you have to forgive me with this camera. I'm looking at everything upside down, and this is like my first time doing one of these videos, so bear with me. But there's the fork tube, or the fork assembly. And if you have a manual, which I imagine you do, then you'll have the same picture I do. What they say is when you go to take one of these apart, that you have to compress this whole fork assembly, right? Because there's a spring inside here, obviously, right? And if you take it apart without compressing it, well, the spring will come flying out and everything else like that. So when you put it back together, you definitely have to compress it, and at least enough to start getting the threads going on it. So I've already had this fork apart, and I kind of put it back together just to kind of go through it so you could see how the whole thing comes apart. Now here obviously is the spring to it, and you can see shiny spots on it. And those are flat where the spring has been riding in the tube, and they're just flat. Now, who you talk to might say, well, that's not going to hurt anything, but that's a flat on the coil, in my opinion, and it's 55 years old, so probably I'm going to ask them who I have rebuild these, because I know this thing needs rebuilt, but for new fork springs to put in it. Now the first thing they say is that you have to compress that, right? So once you compress that, then you can take, once you do that, I'm sorry about the video here, but like I said, I'm upside down here, but when it's under compression, this nut will come out. You have to unthread this nut, and then let up on your compression and then this will come out. What that does is it exposes this, which they call it the slider tube plug. And what that is there is a baffle unit right there. Now then, the parts diagram shows this all coming apart right here. Now I didn't take it apart, and I'm not going to, but basically it's got a cotter pin in there that holds it all together. So what you do is you push that down and pull the cotter pin out. And then the cap comes off, this spring comes off, and then the baffle unit comes out. Now you might see that this has a little notch in it right there. That corresponds with this hole. So when you put it back together, that hole has to line up with that slot, right? And you can hear it seats in there, right? If it doesn't, it's going to set up like that, which is not right. But this basically, from what I understand, as the fork's moving in and out, baffles the oil so that it doesn't have direct contact with the vent plug, so that it's baffling the oil, and the oil should probably drip off back into the tube as far as I understand. Now when you take this apart, you'll see that the cap has two holes. One is a blind hole. That is where your dampener is going to seat in there with that little notch. The other one is the vent hole. That has to be clean and clear. So obviously as you're cleaning this and all that, I don't know if you can see that or not, but that hole there has to be clear. Now then the next part is this cap, the vent cap, and you can see there's a hole there, and that corresponds with the hole in the end here. Now you have to blow air through that to make sure that this is clear. If not, then the fork won't be able to breathe, and I'd imagine that would blow your seals out. So that has to be clean and clear. If it's not, then you have to replace it, because I think it looks to me like this little cap has been set in there and then crimped 3 times so it can't come out. So there's that. Now then the next thing is this little crown nut goes in the end of this on a stud that goes through there. Now you take that out, and then the fork assembly the slider tube, I'm sorry, I get the nomenclature wrong on this a lot, but it should come out, right? And that exposes your dampening unit. Now the dampening unit is held in by a snap ring. You can see it there, right? We have to take that out. So, set of snap ring pliers, and that comes out, right? And then this assembly comes out. And I say assembly because when you look at the drawings, they call this out as just an assembly. Now I looked, and you can buy the parts for it, but you can see on this one, let me wipe it off here, but you can see the galling on it and things like that. So this tube has been wore, and to me it's no good. Right there's some heavy galling right there, but you have these pieces here that go in it, right? Now then this one, you can see this little retainer right here is all it's missing. There's pieces missing and whatnot. So this spring here, there is supposed to be a spring on one side and one side of the other one, right? I have from the other side, it's a little better. You can see that it's got the spring here and that round piece right there that helps to give the spring something to set on. But you can see that one is completely there, right? But you see that's got a lot of wear on it. And there again, this one as well has some heavy galling on it right there. So that one needs replaced as well. So if you look here, this, when you're assembling it, there's flats on it, right? Those flats are going to correspond with the flats in the leg here. So when you put that together, obviously the flats of that stud have to go in the lower leg the same. And that's kind of nice because that gives you a way to tighten that nut down. The newer forks, they say that you have to take that out first before you take the spring out, because the spring holds that still for you to take that out. Now I haven't had a new fork apart, so I couldn't tell you anything about that. So once you get to that point, and I've already, like I said, I've already had this apart, but inside here there's going to be a seal, a felt washer, a retainer, and then a round clip. This here's the seal, the felt washer, the retainer, and then the circular clip. And I don't know, let me see. You see that little tang sticking out there? I got a set of needle nose pliers and pulled on that, and that came out relatively easy. Now then, you know, it goes without saying that I don't use hammers unless I absolutely have to, but you get this seal puller, set it in there, and that'll pop right out, right? Last thing you want to do is start hammering on this and ding up this inside here. I was just going to reseal it, and so I did buy, you know, the gasket kit. The person that's going to rebuild my forks for me was requesting, they said they're going to use James gaskets. There's a little difference here, and there's the part number for whoever might want to get this, right? But there's a notable difference with it. The new seal, if you look at it, it's considerably different. It has the seal that goes in it, right? But then it also has a wiper that's built into this seal. So what this doesn't have is the felt washers for it. And if we look at it, there's a couple differences. Instead of this ring, right, they have this clip. Now, for me, you know, I'm trying to put this bike as close to original back together as I can. Knowing a little bit about seals and stuff like that, this felt washer is okay, and you know, purists might want to put the original seals and all that back in. But what I understand with these forks is that with the covers that go over them here, it traps dirt and things like that in there. And while this is a good dust, you know, inhibitor, right, it'll also get dirt in it. and as you know, impregnate this thing, and then it becomes basically a piece of sandpaper. So I'm okay with the new seal set that they're going to put in it. Now then, going into all that, the fork tubes, I couldn't find a whole lot on what the tolerance was for the fork tubes, but I can measure where it didn't run, and it basically looks like, what does it look like? It looks like 1.624. Now if you go up here where the seal's running, or the sliding bushings, it's almost, you know, it's almost 20, right? So looking at this tube, you can see that, and I can run my finger over it, and you can see that where it's wore out and things like that, right? So this tube is basically shot. The dampener is pretty much garbage as well, so that leaves me with my lower leg. And the lower leg, you have the bushing in here. Now I measured it, and trying to do this upside down. I don't like snap gauges too much because I don't consider them very accurate, but this is almost, you know, 630 it looks like. So the bushings are pretty well washed out too. Now the bushings will need replaced. The problem with that is that to do these, you have to have a puller, then you have to have an installer, and then a reaming tool for it. And all those tools, I looked for them. I'm pretty big on tools and all that, but I couldn't find them anywhere. And really, I mean, I don't know when I'm going to do this again, right? So it's not really even worth it. So basically, I'm going to send the leg, this, and maybe a plug or two, and that's what I'm going to send to have rebuilt. So that's basically how the whole thing comes apart. I might add, and I don't know if any, you know, I don't know who I'm talking to or whatever, but I had a broken bolt in this, right? And I don't know if, you know, if you're not experienced with broken bolts and all that stuff. Everything on this bike is pretty much original, so I think that was an original bolt that was in there. It was fairly easy to drill through. I like to use these 4-fluted extractors. The spiral ones, you can only go one way, and I just wanted to mention this. This hole is threaded fairly deep, and really if you have a broken bolt, normally the threads are pulled on the top of it from the bolt busting off and whatnot. It's best to use one of these. You can take that and run it down, or run the bolt back out. And what I did was I ran it down, ran a tap through it, and then I took it out. You know, blew air out of it, and then took it out. If you try and just take it out, chances are is that those threads will be messed up, and you could cause yourself more headache than worth it if you just try and take it straight out. So just that little bit of time I found helps out a lot. Like I said, I might have mentioned, you know, I'm not an expert. I like these old bikes. I do a lot of work on them. I've got a few that I've done, and I'm just wanting to contribute a little bit here to YouTube and anybody else that might be out there rebuilding bikes and all that. There's not a whole lot of information out there anymore. It's getting kind of thinner and thinner, and the people that used to work on this stuff that really knew what was going on, you know, they're not around as much anymore either. So there's been a lot of times that I've had a lot of questions and have had to do a lot of research and just, you know, a lot more time and things like that working on it, just to understand how it went together so it could be put together properly, right? So if you didn't get anything else out of this other than just how this whole thing come apart and what it looks like before you tear yours apart, well then that's good. And you know, if you want to leave comments, you know, productive ones, right, please? I'd really appreciate that. You know, us guys that are, you know, keeping this old stuff going, it'd be nice to talk a little bit more. So with that, I think I'm pretty much done. So thanks for your time.